Hello, and welcome to the Law Patrol, proudly presented by Legalized. On this channel, we take a look at all things legal and lawful as they happen in Australia and around the world. We review concepts, cases, and just generally shoot the breeze. Whilst we don't give advice, we give you to support as we cover everything legal and don't shy away from the hard topics, we'll go through other themes or discussions that some may find disturbing or distasteful. So if necessary, make yourself a cup of concrete, put on your big kid boots, and pull up a chair. If you have any questions or comments about anything we discuss, please don't hesitate to reach out by email at info@legalizedlegal.com.au. Follow us on Facebook, and remember to hit the like and subscribe buttons. Now, let's get into it.
Good afternoon, and welcome to today's edition of the Law Patrol. Slightly different today, given how sort of stoic I was in the last couple of videos. I've decided to go a little unscripted, so we'll see how that pans out. Today we have an episode called, what did I actually call it? Sex Sells and Gun Laws in the News. Now, obviously with everything that's been going on, sincere best wishes and condolences to the families of the children who were shot and killed in Texas recently. Being a parent myself, I can not even imagine what those individuals would be going through. And it's one of those things that I thought it was probably a timely reminder, and it's probably a good idea for us to actually have a review of what sort of situations there are around guns here in Australia. And I will be trying to stay as on the fence as possible. I certainly don't want to upset any NRA members or any of my US viewers. So I personally have no strong feelings one way or the other in relation to guns and firearms. Personally, I do think that they are, for lack of a better term, cool. In terms of, I mean, look, the closest thing that I'm able to get with how things are in Australia is playing Call of Duty, basically. It in no way makes me any sort of an expert in firearms or anything like that. Shooting guns from behind the screen on a couch is about as close as I ever have, probably ever will get to firing a weapon. Whilst I am envious that some people get to enjoy that themselves, personally, I feel like that's probably a small price to pay so that we don't get put into a situation where families are going to sleep at night without being able to hug their children and kiss them goodnight. It's very disheartening and heartbreaking. Now, the other portion is a little more risque. We're going to be talking about the fact that Victoria has passed legislation to decriminalise sex work. That passed earlier in the year. So the laws were passed in February, basically meaning, now look, previously sex work was allowed to be conducted out of licensed brothels and home premises and things like that. That too was a licensed scenario. What the changes have basically brought in is that we will have sex workers that are able to solicit saying on the street sounds really harsh, but basically they won't be required to put themselves into unsafe situations in order to make ends meet. In particular, from anecdotal evidence, I know that there were some people throughout COVID that were, because that was their main source of income, it was difficult. And the rules surrounding who was entitled to receive payments for support and things like that were quite difficult. But yeah, so we'll get into all that. To start off with, though, we'll start with a little bit of current news. Just bear with me. Okay. First things first. Victoria Police are back in the news. Now, so apparently part of the protests that happened for COVID last year involved, well, I mean, anyone that was in Melbourne at the time saw them. They were pretty much every Saturday, people protesting, having been in lockdown and whatnot. Oh, excuse me. But basically, at the moment, they're looking at taking legal action against certain police officers for the way that they acted in the scenarios. 2 journalists specifically claimed that they were pepper sprayed in separate incidents and say that they're going to take Victoria Police to court. Photographer Louis Askew was covering a heated lockdown protest in Richmond when he was allegedly caught up in a police charge and pepper sprayed in the face, capturing the whole thing on camera. Police had been from the looks of it, police had been subduing a protester. Mr. Askew thinks that particular protester had already been pepper sprayed, and he took a photo, basically. As a result of that, he himself appears to have been pepper sprayed by the police. Now, obviously, journalistic freedoms, you expect news reporting to be present at these sorts of protests. We have a right to free protest and peaceful protest and whatnot. And I mean, there are some limitations to that, obviously. Particularly during the lockdown, there were certain instances where there was, at one point, I believe, there was even a media blackout covering a particular protest, which I personally do think went a little bit far. I think that if there are protests, if people are expressing their displeasure with how a country or state is being run, that shouldn't be able to be hidden. There should be full transparency in relation to that sort of thing. Now, 4 months later, sports reporter Ian Ransom was also pepper sprayed in the face when he was caught up in one of the Novak Djokovic anti-vaccination protests. For anyone that's watched my famously Above the Law video, you'll know that Novak Djokovic came to Australia unvaccinated. He had a bit of a court battle. He was later deported, basically, because he lost his application against the Australian government to have his visa reinstated. So demonstrators gathered outside the lawyer's office as the dispute unfolded. So yeah, Mr. Ransom was there as a journalistic reporter, watching the scene from what he thought was a fairly safe distance, but one of the officers turned around in my direction and sprayed pepper spray directly into both of my eyes. There was no warning from what I could tell. I could just see it happening. It was completely unexpected. Now, given what he said there, that it was completely unexpected, whatnot, there's a good chance he didn't even have the opportunity to identify himself as a journalist. I don't take any recourse against Vic Police. I think that they were, recourse is the wrong word. I don't have anything against Victoria Police. I think that they were in a very difficult situation. I do think that some of the protests during COVID were not as peaceful or as well-intentioned as they may have been. I think certain people may have co-opted them. I personally didn't attend. I was at home looking after my family, basically, during what was, whether it was media hype or whatnot, was a very scary time. Where are we? So Mr. Askew, the initial one that was 4 months prior, said he was pursuing legal action as a matter of principle to ensure a journalist's ability to do their work. The police go about and do their work. They should be able to go home safely. Whenever we want to go to an event or story, we should also have the right to the same thing. We want to go home safely after working. Mr. Ransom said he hopes Victoria Police will review their use of pepper spray, which was described as a very serious weapon. It was like nothing I've ever felt in my life. It was excruciating. It triggered a little bit it triggered a little bit of a panic attack at the time, like my whole body just sort of shut down, he said. I fell on my knees on the road and I was shaking. My heart was racing and I was screaming for water. Now, look, I can honestly say I personally have never been hit with pepper spray. I hope to God that I never am. I believe that it was excruciating. At the same time, would a better alternative have been to be tased? It's if a police officer is fearful for their own safety and they are trying to do their job, yes, they may react on instinct. That doesn't necessarily mean that they are guilty of taking it out on a journalist or anything like that. I think maybe what this was a, I hate using this phrase, a series of unfortunate events. Thank you, Lemony Snicket. I think that probably it was a case of it all happened very quickly, and I think it was probably a case of wrong place at the wrong time. That's not to say that I think that it was handled in any particularly good circumstances or handled particularly well. I think it's just something that in that sort of scenario could easily happen to anybody, whether or not that's being the journalist trying to do their job or the police officer trying to do theirs. I do believe that's the end of the article. So, where are we? Next one, which may be of interest to... Okay. Andrews government moves to jail native forest logging protesters. Now, just to clarify for anyone, the Andrews government is our state government here in Victoria, currently led by Daniel Andrews, who is the Labor leader, been in power for a few years now. Oh, excuse me. Where are we? So basically what this one involves is the fact that they're going to try and bring in some additional legislation so that protesters who attend at logging sites, basically, native forest logging sites. So when we say that, it's native trees. So it's not that it's on native land or anything like that. It's literally these plants are native to Australia. It's Australian timber. So protesters attempting to prevent or disrupt native forest logging in Victoria would face 12 months jail or a $21,000 fine. Activists accused the government of seeking to criminalise peaceful protest. A nice little segue from the other one. From the other article. Peaceful protest in the lead up to the November state election, while Agricultural Minister Mary Ann Thomas said protesters were putting the lives of forest workers at risk. Now, see, this is where you need to try and strike that bit of a balance. As I said, I strongly believe in the right to peaceful protest. I do not believe that any protester has the right to put anyone else's life at risk, be that their own, another protester, or, God forbid, people who take their children to these sorts of protests. Not specifically the logging protest. I would expect that it would be reasonably peaceful, but thinking back, there were plenty of people that took their children to the COVID-19 protests, which I don't necessarily agree with. So the Agricultural Minister continued, "We respect the right to protest safely, but want to make sure workers go home to their families each day," she said. "Every Victorian has the right to be safe at work. Protests are becoming increasingly dangerous, particularly for workers, which is why this legislation will support them to get on with their job and minimise disruption in the industry." Now, I do feel like that's sort of... I keep thinking the word dichotomy, but that's not right. I think they're... You know what, never mind. I'm going to move on. So The Age, which is one of Melbourne's major news agents, basically asked the Agricultural Minister's office whether or not there had been any injuries sustained at logging sites in Victoria over the last year. In response, not only has forest protest activity increased in Victoria over recent years, dangerous new tactics have been deployed by protesters that create an unacceptable risk to the safety of workers, authorised officers and police officers and the protesters themselves. Now, look, that goes back to what I was saying before. I don't have an issue with people peacefully protesting. You want to go and chain yourself to a tractor, that's fine. You want to try and damage the tractor by sticking a pole in it that could, potentially cause thousands of dollars worth of damage to the tractor, or even, if you hit the wrong thing, could cause a spark, cause a fire. I know that's a long shot, but you never know. There have been instances of protesters blocking heavy working machinery, locking onto the machinery, tethering tree sits to machinery, and standing under idle machinery. All of these tactics have a detrimental impact on the workers, both physically and mentally. And that's right too. I mean, look, yes, you want to protest. Yes, you want to get change made. That shouldn't be at the expense of necessarily someone else's mental well-being. If I was sitting there with one of those big logging trucks and someone decided to step under the bucket, not in front of the machine or anything like that, where it's completely within my control to make sure that I don't run over anybody or anything like that. But if the arm of the thing is out like that and there is someone standing directly beneath that, and up here is a bolt or something, it could be a 1 in a million freak accident. But if that drops, it's outside my control, but someone has just been crushed in front of me. I know that that's an exaggeration, but it's a 1 in a million that could potentially happen. And that's not really something that anyone should have to go through. Liberty Victoria President Michael Stanton said the organisation opposed the new penalties, which appeared to be plainly intended to have a chilling effect on protest activity. Such protesters have the right to freedom of expression and peaceful assembly under the Victorian Charter of Human Rights, and are protected by the implied freedom of political communication under the Constitution. The Victorian Charter of Human Rights, at least back when I went through law school, which was, over a decade ago. Oh, geez, it really was. To clarify, it's nowhere near as robust as, say, the US Bill of Rights or anything like that. The Charter of Human Rights can be just as easily set aside by a piece of legislation by including a clause in it that says, we acknowledge that this is incompatible with the Charter of Human Rights of Victoria, or that any actions taken under this particular legislation must be done insofar as they can be with the Victorian Charter of Human Rights. Look, I haven't looked at it in a little while. It may well have changed by then, but that was my understanding at the time. The implied freedom of political communication of the Constitution. I'm in two minds about that. Such draconian measures are plainly disproportionate. Vic Forests is defending almost a dozen community-led legal challenges to native forest logging. Now, see, that is an appropriate way to protest against it. You want it stopped, you do it properly, you do it legally. Wow, so last year, Vic Forests posted a $4.7 million annual loss, despite being given almost $18 million by the state government, attributing to the loss to the unprecedented number of court challenges from the community and environment groups, and the destruction of timber in the Black Summer bushfires. It's an interesting takeaway. In 2019, the then Premier Daniel Andrews, I should say current Premier Daniel Andrews, announced the logging of native forests would be phased out in Victoria over the next decade, with a reduction in the level of native timber available for logging from 2024 to 2025. And in 2030, Vic Forests will become a plantation-based timber supply business. Okay, so yeah, look, they're basically protesting now about them clearing out the land where they're going to plant trees to later be cut down in a sustainable manner. Anyway, environmental campaigner said the government was just trying to demonize public protest. I don't agree with that in the slightest. I think it's, having looked at the legislation, it's purely so that people don't do anything reckless or stupid that can endanger other people. Tuffy Mortzer has said the only thing dangerous is Dan Angel's government's continued commitment to thrashing our carbon stores and our water security through continued census logging, even after the worst bushfires in living memory. No comment. Excuse me. She continued on, the fact is the government has completely sat on its hands after the Black Saturday bushfires, and logging practices have not changed at all. We need action now. The new laws, which have yet to pass, would introduce maximum fines of $21,000 or 12 months imprisonment for protesters who illegally enter timber harvesting zones and block workers or their machine. I don't know if that's strictly... That's a very broad generalization. PVC and metal pipes, which make it hard to dislodge protesters once they have changed their bodies to machinery and equipment to disrupt logging, would be added to the list of items prohibited on timber harvesting operations. That I can understand. If there's anything else that... I mean, look, you want to go and chain yourself to a tree and that sort of thing, that's fine. Don't bring any sort of extra items into the equation. It's unnecessary and it's dangerous. Anyone found carrying those items could face additional fines. Authorised officers would be given the power to search people's bags and vehicles for pipes and issue protesters with banning notices preventing them from entering the logging sites. And the thing you got to remember as well, it's not like it's public property. I mean, the logging areas are either government owned or private property. So whether or not you're going in there to protest or not, you've got to remember that you're still subject to laws of trespass, of assault, of all that sort of stuff as well. I mean, I'm pretty sure for the most part the native forest ones is government-owned land. I could well be wrong on that. I'll need to double check. Forest campaigner Chris Schruger said the new laws are really heavy-handed and a draconian response to people taking action to stop logging in our native forests. 12 months imprisonment for peaceful, non-violent protesting is ridiculous. Well, see, he's taken that out of context there. I mean, we're not talking about people that will be engaging in peaceful, non-violent protests. There's no way that is what would be imposed on people just for protesting at the site. If you're not going out of your way to do something stupid, then you won't be getting 12 months imprisonment. It's just not going to happen. Government is framing the new laws as necessary to protect the safety of timber workers and the The government is framing the new laws as necessary to protect the safety of timber workers, and Workplace Safety Minister Ingrid Stitt said every Victorian deserved to be safe at work. Absolutely. Timely reminder, even if you're working in something like an office, go and check your cabling, check for trip hazards. By all means, if you have a workplace incident or anything like that, give me a buzz. I'll put you in touch with my wife who works in personal injury. Victorian Greens leader Samantha Ratnam said Victoria's native forests were being logged at an alarming rate, describing the penalties for peaceful protest as extreme. Victorians have just voted unequivocally for candidates supporting climate action, which includes protecting forests. Yet instead of protecting our precious forests, the Victorian Labor government seems hell-bent on logging at all costs. Vic Forest was contacted for comment but did not respond before the deadline. Oh, excuse me. Apologies that you had to hear that. All right, I was going to do another one on renewables, but I think that might be enough to annoy enough people about the environment for the moment. I also had one on house prices. I will do house prices in another video as well. I can honestly say I would be able to talk for hours and hours on the current state of the housing market, what is likely to happen for new home buyers and for investment properties. And that's just something through my own experience, both as a lawyer and a conveyancer. And I also deal with mortgage brokers and I'll do a lot of mortgage work as well and personal loan agreements. So I have been putting together my own information, and it does, there is quite a bit that I could go into, basically, is what I'm saying. So what I will do instead is get straight smack into sex selling. Decriminalising sex work in Victoria. Now, I'm going to try and do this as what's the word I'm looking for here? As classy as possible. But basically, on the 22nd of February 2022, the Sex Work Decriminalization Act was passed by the Victorian Parliament and has become law. The new laws recognise that sex work is legitimate work and is better regulated through standard business laws, like all other industries in the state. Now, as I said before, sex work had previously been operating under a licensed agreement. You had to work in a licensed brothel. If you were doing anything on your own, you still had to have various licenses and that sort of thing. And you weren't treated necessarily as a sole trader, as a legitimate business, things like that. Every worker in Victoria, no matter their industry, deserves to feel safe in their workplace. So what's actually changing? The first stage commenced just over 2 weeks ago on the 10th of May 2022 and includes the decriminalisation of street-based sex work in most locations. Try saying that 3 times fast. So basically that means that you won't need to contact through a brothel, through any other agencies. It will be possible for sex workers to, shall we say, solicit for work while out and about. Given that it was 14 degrees last night, I highly doubt anyone's going to be doing that anytime soon. Right. The repeal of offences for working with a sexually transmitted infection and requirements to undergo regular STI testing. That one is interesting. Trying to think why they necessarily would have repealed it for working. Although I suppose I haven't actually looked at the legislation in a while. STI may be very broad, and there may be some that are still okay to engage in work under. I really couldn't say. I can't tell from the wording there whether or not they're introducing requirements or if they're repealing requirements to undergo regular STI testing. I would be hoping it would be the repeal of offences for working and... Oh, no, sorry, it would be the repeal. That might not be so great, but to each their own. The repeal of offences for individual sex workers not using safer sex practices. I presume that is removing the offences for not using... let's just say it. We're all big people here. I'd say that's because they're not using rubbers. So I presume... Yeah, repeal offences for individual sex workers. Okay. The repeal of the small owner-operator sex work service provider registrar. Now, so that was the license, the register that you had to be licensed with in order to act on your own, basically, as not part of a larger brothel business. Changes to advertising controls applicable. Okay, well, that'll be interesting. Probably see a few more ads appearing on buses, maybe. Amendments to the Equal Opportunity Act. Second stage expected to come in December. So December, not this year, next year. We'll be completely abolishing the sex work service provider licensing system by repealing the Sex Work Act. Reenacting offences relating to children, excellent, and coercion in other legislation to ensure their continued operation following repeal of the Sex Work Act. Excellent. So the Sex Work Act does cover very specific things in relation to underage and vulnerable people. It's good to see that that's going to continue in place. Glad they thought of that. Changes to planning controls to treat sex work businesses like any other business. I wonder if they'll have to register for ABNs. Probably. If they haven't already, actually thinking about it. The changes to the industry allow regulation to be maintained through existing agencies such as WorkSafe, which is basically our... So, I'm trying to remember whether or not WorkSafe should just be Victorian. I think... Was it Commonwealth? I have to ask the wife. WorkSafe, which is basically a mandatory workplace insurance place. So if you are injured on the job, I know at least in Victoria anyway, if you're injured on the job, you can claim for injuries, total and permanent disability, or even death against your employer's insurance, which is good. The Department of Health and local governments, obviously. The Victorian government will continue to work with key stakeholders, including sex workers, their peer organisations, local councils, and other key stakeholders to ensure the reforms are implemented in the best way possible. Now, they go on to say why they're decriminalising, giving a whole bunch of good reasons. Basically, Launchpad it's safer for people, and that the licensing system is outdated and difficult to navigate to those who try to work within it. Those without a license or those practicing street-based sex work are breaking the law and therefore do not have access to basic rights and entitlements, in particular under WorkSafe and things like that. In addition to that, sex workers can be put off from engaging with support systems like healthcare providers, the justice system, and other government services because they fear being stigmatized. Yeah, I can kind of get that. I think that there's quite some, shall we say, prudy people will probably be a bit judgmental. Benefits of decriminalisation. They'll have more agency to choose where they provide their services and their sexual health requirements. They'll be regulated like any other worker in any other industry to help address the stigma and discrimination. Sex workers have better access to health and legal services without fear of self-incrimination. Increased transparency to help discourage criminal infiltration of the sector. Good. Offences relating to sex trafficking, children, coercion, and other criminal activities continue to apply. Where are we? What has caused what's informed the change? Victorian government asked Fiona Patten MP to lead a review to make recommendations to the Minister for Consumer Affairs in decriminalising sex work in Victoria. So basically, in making recommendations, the MP took into account that all forms of sex work, including those in commercial brothels and escort agencies, and sexual services provided in massage parlours. Happy ending, anyone? Oh, sorry. And similar businesses, sex work by small owner business operators, and okay, so she was asked to consider basically all forms of sex work, consider whether or not there was workplace safety implications and the stigma and discrimination against sex workers, regulatory requirements for operators of commercial sex work businesses, the enforcement powers to address criminal activity in the sex work industry, local amenities and locations of premises, promotion of public health, safety and well-being. And then apparently in August last year, they had a public consultation. That one would have slipped under the radar due to COVID. I certainly didn't see anything in the news about any sort of public consultation. Not that I would have had anything to comment on. It's, but yeah, so basically it's now going to be legal for sex work to be, well, basically done on the street. I mean, I can only speak anecdotally. But I think everyone in Bendigo, in Victoria, where I did my VCE, I think everyone there knew of a specific corner in the centre of town, or at least used to make jokes about it. Hopefully this will help reduce the stigma of the people that choose to engage in sex work and, yeah, make life easier for them, which I think everyone deserves a good shot at. I mean, it is genuinely. I mean, everyone's heard the story about it being the oldest profession in the world. And I mean, look, that's probably true. In particular, there's been studies using monkeys where, they, in return for completing certain tasks, they get given a silver coin. Some of them worked out that they could give the silver coin to a female chimp in exchange for, you know what I'm saying. But yeah, so I think if it's that ingrained, I think it's probably only right that it's properly regulated. I do think that it's something that shouldn't have been criminalized, but then again, that's my personal opinion. All right. Now, if you just excuse me. Sorry about Where are we? Okay, moving on to Firearms and Licensing. Now, this is obviously hot on the heels of what happened at the school in Texas. I've, as I said earlier, I have moderate views on guns, gun control, gun laws, all that sort of thing. I think it would be interesting to. No, interesting's the wrong word. I think it'd be fun to go to a gun range. I've never once thought about it actually doing it seriously. But obviously it's promoted in movies, in video games, in all sorts of things. So, and I do think that a big part of that comes out of the fact that a lot of the game developers and whatnot, not so much pandering, but designing their games around the culture in which they're designed. So, not that I'm blaming America or anything for that. I'm just saying it's developed to target a particular culture. And, I'm a huge, huge Halo fan. So I, can't say one thing one way or another as to violence in video games or anything like that, because part of how I have my downtime is firing up the Xbox and shooting some aliens in the face. So now, in terms of firearms licensing, there's no real uniform national firearms legislation in Australia. The Commonwealth of Australia does control the import of weapons, but the states and territories each have their own legislative schemes that regulate the ownership and use of firearms in each of the states. Sorry, when I say that there's no uniform firearms legislation, it's slightly... That's not necessarily correct, because basically Australia's stance on gun laws basically came about because of what happened on the 28th of April in 1996, referred to as the Port Arthur Historic Site Massacre, where basically a disturbed individual killed 35 people using some form of, I believe it was some form of semi-automatic rifle. I think that there was discussions over whether or not it was I want to say SKS or an AR-15. I probably should have looked that up, to be perfectly honest. But prior to 1996, there had been 13 mass shootings over 8 years, where at least 4 people had lost their lives. So, yeah. Where are we? But I mean, look, as I said, I'm not trying to denigrate or disparage people from owning firearms. I have a lawyer friend in the US who actually celebrated passing the bar by going out and purchasing an M9 handgun, and going to the range to shoot off a assault rifle. So I do not have any sort of issues with this. I genuinely wish I could have been able to join him. But anyway, where are we? So firearms in Victoria are heavily regulated. You must have a firearms license, and it must be for a particular purpose or reason. It must be under a specific part of the Act. There are exceptions and whatnot. In Victoria, a firearm is a device that has the appearance of a firearm that has the potential to fire an object, being a shot, bullet, or other missile, by the expansion of gases produced in the device by the ignition of a strongly combustible material, compressed air, or other gases, whether stored in the device in pressurized containers or produced by mechanical means. So basically what they're specifying there is it covers pretty much anything and everything where a projectile will leave the barrel. I mean, by that strict definition, a Nerf gun is considered a firearm, which is why they have had to include a specific exception for those sorts of things. A firearm can be assembled or in its parts and is still a firearm whether operable or not, or whether made temporarily or permanently inoperable. Two main types considered here in Victoria are the handguns and then the long arms, which is basically anything that is over the length of 65 centimeters. So whether it's a shotgun, a rifle, a, whatever. Yeah, so I just thought it'd be interesting that we've got to cover over what is important to consider when applying for a firearm license. I mean, obviously for people on the farm to use for hunting pests and that sort of thing, obviously you've got a very good reason for it. I live in the middle of the suburbs. I don't work in security. I don't have a legitimate reason to apply for even a handgun. And personally, I do feel safer that way. Because you hear all the horrible stories of, young family members finding them or everything. I mean, yes, before you get started on me, people, I understand that if it's kept in a gun safe, if it's kept separate from its ammunition, if it's kept whatever, that there are all, provided all safety measures are taken, there shouldn't be any sort of accidents. But to give that an analogy, there weren't really any issues with the Velociraptors until the fence went down. All particular safety aspects have been taken. They were still dangerous. It's still dangerous. In the right circumstances, a gun can be just as deadly, obviously. But anyway, if there's anyone that, is looking to move into security or things like that, obviously make sure you do your research. You do need special training. You do need a license, and yeah. Now, so firearms are regulated by the Firearms Act 1996, which came in as part of the agreement that was ratified across Australia in relation to just after the Port Arthur event. They must be registered with Victoria Police, and a permit must be acquired, as well as an appropriate firearms license, in order to be able to purchase, possess, carry, or use such devices in Victoria. Now, getting those licenses, provided you have a legitimate reason, is not difficult. It's a background check. It's making sure that you've got legitimate reason. Personally, that would be my preferred way of dealing with guns worldwide, but I understand everyone has their own opinions. Imitation firearms. An imitation firearm is a device that can be reasonably mistaken for an operable firearm. However, the device is not designed, nor has it been adapted to discharge a shot, bullet, missile, or other thing by expansion of gases of the device. Imitation firearms are regulated by the Control of Weapons Act. To display, possess, carry, use, or import, or sell them in Victoria, you need to apply for an exemption, basically. Now, that applies to... actually, thinking about it, I think that might even come under the same area as... it's the Control of Weapons Act, so that also covers swords and things like that, because I actually ran into that a few years ago. I was looking at purchasing a replica energy sword from Halo, and yeah, trying to get a license for that wasn't going to be easy either. Gel blasters. Now, this is where things get interesting, because this is like a toned-down version of paintball. It's classed as an imitation firearm or a firearm under the Act. I would still argue that gel blasters are potentially toy firearms. Yes, they do launch something, but so does a Nerf gun. Does a gel blaster have the ability to be lethal? See, I don't know that it does. Not unless you have a 1 in a million shot through someone's eye or something. We have determined that gel blasters and similar types of devices are classified as an imitation firearm if they have the appearance of a firearm. That means that a gel blaster that has the appearance of an operable firearm and can be reasonably mistaken for a firearm are now regulated as an imitation firearm under Section 3 of the Control Act. A gel blaster that does not have the appearance of an operable firearm and cannot be mistaken for a firearm is now classified. Oh, it is. Gel blasters that does not have the appearance of an operable firearm and couldn't be mistaken for a firearm are now classified as a toy firearm and not regulated. Guess who's going shopping? A gel blaster that has been adapted or manufactured to operate like a firearm is now regulated as a firearm. Well, that makes more sense. That must have changed recently because because when gel blasters first made an appearance on TikTok and that sort of thing not that long ago, I looked into them and everything that I could find was that they were regulated. But I guess maybe now there's been a delineation between the ones that have the appearance of a firearm, or that have been adapted or manufactured to operate like a firearm. Interesting. Currently do not. Gel balls are not subject to any regulations. They're not regarded to be ammunition. Excellent. We currently do not issue approvals for gel blasters to any individual organization. Oh. Yeah, so they go through all that. It's not regulated. It's not considered to be a firearm. There remains no lawful reason to possess or use them in Victoria. You giveth with one hand, you taketh away with the other. We currently don't. Decision not only removes any ambiguity surrounding the regulations around gel blasters, it also allows our members to appropriately enforce legislation. This means there is no need to physically inspect each device when an item is seized. Great. Exception to this is when the gel blaster appears to have been modified to operate like a firearm. Okay, exempt firearms. Now, these are your antiques, basically, or things that have been passed down through the family. Firearm is exempt if it was manufactured before 1900 and meets the following criteria. If it's a handgun, its method of ignition predates the development of percussion or is a single-shot antique handgun. Long arms do not take cartridge ammunition, so literally ball and musket. Ball in there, sticking it down. Please don't turn that into a meme. If it does take cartridge ammunition, that ammunition is not commercially available. Exempt firearms include pre-1900 muzzle and breech loading firearms such as flintlocks, matchlocks, wheel locks, snap hancers, cap locks. I'll have to look up what a cap lock is. Is someone going to try and shoot me with a letter A? Inoperable military cannons or field guns, cannon net devices, and remote-controlled model warship cannons. Paintball markers. We all know what a paintball marker is. Gas-powered paintball shooter. It's designed to discharge a projectile. It primarily consists of a dye or similar substance designed to mark a person or object. Paintball markers must be registered with Victoria Police, and anyone wishing to own a paintball marker for paintball marker activities at an approved location must hold a paintball marker license. Non-prohibited persons wishing to participate in the activities only, not owning a paintball marker, do not need a license to do so. Now, I'm not going to bother going through all the toys. You can pick up a cap gun at the local news agency if you want to. But basically, look, Victoria has all these things in place to make sure that people stay safe when around firearms. And for the most part, I think that they're important. I mean, people can make the argument that, if you have all these regulations, what happens if only the criminals have guns? Well, look, I can understand that side of the argument. I really can. But if I was standing in a store that was being robbed, there were two gentlemen, both carrying shotguns, holding up. Let's say they're in the servo, they're holding up the place. If I'm in there and I have a handgun on me, let's just say hypothetically, different set of laws, different scenarios, and I was even willing to carry a handgun on me, I don't know that in that scenario it would make a difference. Not only because, I may or may not have my daughter with me, in which case I sure as shit wouldn't make any, excuse the language, I wouldn't make any sudden movements or anything. But I don't know that I would personally want to be involved in that scenario anyway. And I don't think I'd necessarily have any need to be. A lot of people are of the opinion that no amount of money is worth someone's life. I generally do tend to fall into that category. I was slightly disturbed a little while ago. I don't remember whether or not it was a joke or not, but I saw that there was a ad for a backpack that came with a built-in bulletproof vest that you sort of pull over and down. I mean, I saw that those were available for both kids and adults, and it just makes me think that that might be... I mean, look, don't get me wrong. I think there's certain parts of the world where that would be a brilliant idea, and, you know, all the power to you. It's not something that I would feel comfortable having to be in a position to buy my child or buy my wife or buy for myself. But yeah, anyway, as I said, that's not going to stop me from wanting to go to a gun range and have a go at it myself. It's, you know, it's like golf, it's like hockey, it's like anything else. There are legitimate places and there are legitimate reasons to enjoy using firearms. I just think that it needs to be done appropriately and preferably by someone who isn't necessarily off their face, isn't at that point in time going through some severe mental illness issues. I would prefer background checks. Let's put it that. I'll be perfectly honest. I would prefer background checks. Okay. Yes, I get that people can go on the street and buy weapons, whatever. Not only do I feel like you just need to be seen to be doing something, but I think that it would have a legitimate improvement and a legitimate effect. It sure as hell did for us. Okay. Anyway, where are we? Almost up to an hour. Oh, and it's almost home time. So I'm going to end it there. I really hope that this has been either enjoyable or educational. I don't think I threw any jokes into this one round. I will work on that, I swear. I definitely want to throw a shout out to Alita at Legal Bites, Rich at Hogue Law, Rob at Law and Lumber, Kurt on Civil Law, and Joe at Good Logic. Those guys are doing an amazing job covering the Amber Heard v. Depp trial. They have cost me a significant amount of sleep over the last 6 weeks. I can only imagine how they're doing, running on coffee made with Red Bull, as far as I'm concerned or aware. Go and give them some love because they are doing an amazing job, and I don't think that the mainstream media has covered in any sort of semblance of legitimate reporting for the most part. I know here in Australia it certainly hasn't. It's all been, well, in my opinion, they have all been sort of puff pieces or things designed to, the vast majority of them have been anti-Depp, let's put it that way. And I think that it's probably important that a even keel and a proper unbiased opinion gets out there. That's not to say that I myself am unbiased. I know where I fall in Depp v. Heard. It would be nice for everyone to basically make up their own minds, investigate the evidence for themselves, make up their own minds without having mainstream media shove it down your throats. Until next time, this has been the Law Patrol. Stay healthy, wealthy, and wise, or, to the best of your ability, and I'll see you later. Bye.